Who is a retractor? The retractor is someone who has been to a therapist who has been very badly mistreated. We don't have to get into all the issues of repression, although they're very important issues. I try to stay away from the fact of children having been, there we go, is that better? Away from all the stuff about the eating of children, the cutting up of fetuses, the drinking of blood, all the other things that the therapists have taken just so nonchalantly as being true. All I do is focus on, and it comes from my military background, is a target. Did that therapist fall below the standard of care? The standard of care, not standard care, and we'll get into that. Did the therapist fall below the standard of care? And if they did, we win. And it is very simple when you bring a lawsuit against these therapists to win, because you get all the medical records, and they are the sloppiest, stupidest things you've ever seen in your entire life. And I'm not talking about professional therapists who do a good job day in and day out. What I'm talking about, therapists that are sloppy, they're careless, they're not educated very well. If they did happen to get a PhD at some good university, I don't know how they did it. They weren't paying any attention, and somehow they got the grades. But there they are, and they're just doing sloppy work. That's what I'm upset with them about. And that's what makes it very easy in Texas, at least, and other parts of the country where I've been. When you get 12 Texans listening to the junk that we've heard about, they don't sit around and debate how many angels have danced on the head of a needle. They just convict. And that's as simple as that. Now, as a lawyer, before you ever take a retractor case, one of the things you're going to need to do is to really give a damn about your client. If you've decided to get in law to make money, you should not take this case. You will be making a lot of money, but your heart will not be in the right place. What you have to do with a retractor who has been abused by a professional, and remember you're the next professional that she or he has come to, is that you've got to be willing to sit down and take a lot of time with that lady and spend a lot of time with her, explain to her what all of her rights are, do it very carefully, and you need to be ready to take 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 phone calls a day sometimes. Laura Pasley, are you in here? Laura Pasley was my first client that I had taken in this area, and she had a successful settlement in her case. But we had lots of conversations in the beginning, and then there became a point where I decided I didn't want to discuss her case. All of that, I was getting too many phone calls from Laura. But by that time, we had a rapport so that I could get on the phone with her and say, Laura, I'm working on your case. I don't have time to talk to you right now. I love you, but I got to go, okay? And then she got used to that after a while. After she yelled at me a couple times, I yelled at her. But we became very, very good friends. And you have to really care about your client in order to do these kinds of cases. And then you have to get busy, and you have to get to work as a lawyer. And some of the things that you want to do, for example, who are the therapists in this, who are the parties in this kind of a case? The parties are the therapist, number one, you're going to be suing. All doctors, medical doctors who are responsible for supervising the treatment of the non-physician therapist. And the MDs, if you're going to supervise these therapists, then I suggest, number one, you be qualified to do it, and number two, you actually supervise them. Because if you don't actually supervise them, there's going to be some lawyer that's going to be asking you, where were you when that therapist was involved in rage therapy? Where were you when that therapist heard her say that she had been taken away by a space alien and had sex with him and a space alien and chopped him up, put him in a refrigerator, came back to life and everything was okay, and the therapist said, what happened next? Now, I got quoted in Penthouse for saying that, and it wasn't quite eloquent. My other lawyer friends up here have been quoted in Harvard Law Review and stuff like that. I'm quoted in Penthouse. This will be the last time false memory invites me here because they didn't know that. Anyway, you will also be suing the hospitals which admitted the retractor and gave treatment credentials to these treaters. Any other individual who wants to jump in on a bandwagon and give this lady advice of some silly sort, then you will be looking at their homeowner's insurance and you can be making recovery there. Those kinds of people are sometimes like these police officers who are I forget what they call them, abuse cops or something like that, who have absolutely no sense at all in this area. And everything I say here, I'm willing to debate anywhere, okay? And you send me the abuse cop that wants to debate that issue. But they get in there and they say, yeah, they're, you know, like some of these out of Chicago that say they're a bunch of devils running around Chicago and they're eating them up and killing them and burying the bodies everywhere. And the FBI, Kenneth Lanning, saying, show me where the bodies are. That police officer is also going to get sued, and his homeowner's insurance may pick that up. At least we're going, and I hope the insurers are listening to these things, because our intention is to take the money from your insurance company and put it into the pockets of those who have been abused by the therapist. When you get your case, lawyers, when you get your case, this is what we do. This is what we do. First of all, we thoroughly investigate the repressed memory claim. Now, therapists, when someone comes into you and says, I've been abused by Satan, who's on a white horse, I guess a black horse or a red horse or whatever Satan rides around on these days, what we do as lawyers is that we thoroughly investigate the claim. We get all the medical, psychiatric, and school records of the retractor from their childhood to present. We interview the retractor's peers, their parents, the siblings, relatives, neighbors, friends, teachers, and anyone with whom the retractor was likely to confide. We look at the nature and origin of the initial disclosure in as much detail as possible. We look at the nature of any current therapy of the retractor, or the techniques such as hypnosis and survival groups used. We look at the training and the background of the therapist. Sometimes that only takes seconds. Sometimes we look at whether the therapist specializes in treating MPD or trauma search therapy. That may or may not have a consideration. We look at all the books, television shows, workshops about sexual abuse, of rape to which a retractor may have been exposed. We look at those kinds of things. We look at the work history of the retractor. We go on and on and on and on. And guess what? We're not investigators. I'm not paid to be an investigator. I am paid very well to be smart, though. And therapists are also paid about $100 to $150 an hour, varying on what kind of therapist is. And some of these hospitals they go into are charging about $1,000 a day, and they say they're not detectives. Well, I'm not a detective either, but what we are is professionals. And what we want to do is find out what the truth is in this thing. And you may say, I'm not a detective, but you've got, I don't know, when I was in undergraduate school, even at A&I, they taught us, I had an undergraduate in psychology, they taught us about social histories. You just don't take the patient's word for it. Now, we've heard a lot of that today, and the therapists out there need to be doing the same kind of thing and get off this deal about they're not detectives. We know you're not detectives, but you are therapists and you're getting paid good money, so get after it. A suggestion of implanted memory may exist if there's no corroborating evidence of abuse and the alleged behaviors are highly improbable. A suggestion of implanted memory exists if an adult is claiming repression or amnesia and has only recently remembered the abuse. And it goes on and on. Now this is all on the paper, and I'm trying to speed along here. So just in case I don't get it all on your way back on the airplane or whatever, or the next time you get a chance, look through this thing and it'll talk about it. I'm going to jump on over very quickly to this standard of care business. That's on page 12 of your outline in your book. And treatment was below the standard of care. The term standard of care is not naturally a part of a physician's or a therapist's vocabulary. You're held to the standard of care, but you know nothing about it. The reason why you know nothing about it is because it was not taught to you in medical school. It was not taught to you in your courses in psychology. That's not anything that you concentrated on. What you were concentrating on is first trying to heal the patient and trying to do a good job there. A standard of care, in essence, that which one abstracts from the idealized intellectual process of the physician or a therapist when applied to a very specific clinical situation. What doctors do, what therapists do, is they take, when they're trying to deal with a patient on a specific case, is that they take all of their knowledge all together and try to do the best they can at that certain time. That's what the standard of care is. Now, I'm talking about the standard of care, not standard care. Standard care is what everybody is doing. I don't care what everybody's doing. If everybody is retrieving memory and not paying any attention to what they should be paying attention to in the medical schools and in the books, the good books, the hard-bound books, not those soft-bound books. When you start looking at those soft-bound books, all I got to do is, there's two exhibits I'm going to admit into evidence. One, I'm going to put a sticker on your forehead and admit you. And number two, I'm going to admit the Courage to Heal book and look at the jury and say, okay guys, what do you want to do next? And they're going to go back into that jury room and I'll tell you what they're going to do next. It's going to happen over and over and over in this country until Paul McHugh was talking about we want to close up that little area of how long this is going to last. I think these lawsuits are going to do that. On that subject, very quickly, as a side note, I have talked to Colin Ross, and I have got permission to talk from Paul McHugh. I've talked to Elizabeth Loftus and some of the others. In case you don't know who Colin Ross is an MD in Dallas. He is well known in the area of dissociative thinking, or dissociative theory. He is one of the profound or renowned experts on multiple personality disorder. He has attended this session. I have spoken to him, and he has said, and I spoke to him before we got to Dallas, not before we got to Dallas, but when we left Dallas there, and also coming on the airplane. And he tells me that there's much that's gone on in this meeting that he has heard that he agrees with. And I know that he's a friend of mine, Paul McHugh's a friend of mine, Beth Loftus is, and everyone that you've heard speak, virtually I know them all. Here's what I'm proposing, and I've got permission to do this. Let's say that Colin Ross and Paul McHugh agree on 80% of this stuff. What I'm saying is, to shorten up this little time frame, I'm predicting we're going to be at this for about 7 or 8 years unless we come together and get away from this polarization and come together and say to the clinicians out there, in a letter from maybe from McHugh and Colin Ross, who a lot of people on the quote other side respect, and McHugh, who on this side we respect, to say these are some of the things that are clearly acceptable. These are some of the things that are clearly not acceptable. And on those clearly not acceptable things, if you do those things, we're both going to be testifying in the same trial that you fell below the standard of care. Maybe we can erase some of the really bad, egregious stuff so that won't be happening to your daughters anymore. While I'm on that subject, talking about this side and the other side and all that kind of business, my background is in the military. I went through the Air War College, and we were always taught as military officers that just hang on. About every 20 or 25 years, who was our enemy is going to be our enemy no more. We have seen that all happen in our lifetimes with the Soviets. I mean, it was just all of a sudden the Berlin Wall fell down. Top of the wall, and they were taking the wall down. That can happen here, ladies and gentlemen, if we work together towards that end. I would like to get back to my paper a little bit. I bet you would like me to do that too. I want to talk about what the duties are when you're suing on behalf of a therapist, on behalf of a retractor. These are the duties that are owed to a patient, and they're found on page 14. And this is Texas A&I stuff here. Okay, this isn't rocket scientist stuff here. The first one is that there's a duty to examine the patient correctly. There's a duty to recognize symptoms. If you breach those duties, and that causes harm to my client, I will be asking a jury to give her lots of money for that. Okay? So that while we go over these things maybe kind of quickly, they all mean something very important. Duty to recognize the symptoms. Duty to diagnose properly. Duty to diagnose properly. If you do not know what the symptoms are, you do not know how to diagnose properly. Okay? Duty to order proper diagnostic procedures. Duty to perform diagnostic procedures properly. And it goes on. Duty to provide proper treatment. Duty to properly hospitalize. The duty to give the proper treatment. You can't give proper treatment if you don't recognize the symptoms. If you don't recognize the symptoms, obviously you don't know how to diagnose. If you don't know how to diagnose, you don't know how to treat. This stuff is easy. It's Texas A&I stuff. I bet you I'm going to hear from A&I on, you know, why the hell did you go to our school? Why didn't you go somewhere else? They're probably going to do some investigation and find out I didn't even graduate from anywhere. We had that happen to some of our officials in Texas. I bet you they appreciate me saying that too. Back on the standard of care, and I'm going to try to cut this thing a little bit short so I can get us back on track here so we can all eat when we're supposed to eat around 5:15. The standard of care, the standard of care versus standard care. The standard of care is what we all instinctively know it is. I can tell you, if you guys haven't got it figured out, the juries do. Okay? And what they want is, they want their physicians, they want their therapists out there trying to really do some good. And they can smell it. When you're doing the right thing, they know it. And when you're doing the wrong thing, they know that too. And when they start hearing about how you believe in space aliens, how you believe in all this stuff that we've heard lately, they're going to look at you and say, my God, you must have gone to Texas A&I. No, I'm just kidding. No, again, I'm kidding. But the standard of care. Standard care, I'll give you a little quick example. The standard of care in Texas is 55 miles an hour, okay? Now, a lot of people in Texas go, instead of 55, they go like 65 and 70 miles an hour. And they all do that. That's standard care. But when the Texas Highway Department trooper comes by and you go in standard care, he's going to pull you over and give you a ticket because you weren't abiding by the standard of care. Just because everyone is doing recovered memory is not going to get you out of my sights. How are we doing on time? 5. Well, 5 more minutes. Let me tell you about how I explain standard of care in Texas. For 5 more minutes. I'll do a soft shoe. I'll bring my wife up here, maybe we can dance for 4 more minutes. Anyway, it's like having, and this is, you know, when you're talking to juries, you have to really get to where they live. And the first thing we lawyers try to do is make sure they don't think of us as lawyers. So I never refer to my client as my client. I try to make them understand I'm not a lawyer as much as I can because they don't like me. They don't like lawyers is what the problem is. So you try to distance out of the way and get them off on these standard of care things. It's like driving a pickup down the street in Texas, okay? Now when you're driving a pickup and you're just driving along, and you just got to start dragging it on out when you're in Texas, driving along in a pickup truck, and you're just driving and you don't really have a load, well, that's one standard of care. I mean, you're just not really paying, you know, you go what you're supposed to do, but then when you put like a mattress in the back of that pickup truck and you're moving, well, now you got to start, you know, looking back there in that rear view mirror, making sure that mattress isn't going to fall out. You start paying more attention to what you do. Because if you don't, the mattress is going to fall out and it's going to cause a wreck somewhere on the freeway. And then if you happen to be carrying perhaps dynamite in that pickup truck, you're going to really be driving safely then. You might even have a police escort. When you're dealing with the human mind, think about how much attention you have to pay to that, ladies and gentlemen. When you're dealing with the human mind, that standard of care has moved on up, and we don't care about standard care anymore. And in this case, ladies and gentlemen, you know what has happened. That standard of care has been falling below. And they want to talk about, well, we did all we could while we were charging $1,200 a day in that hospital. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know that dog's not going to hunt in Texas. And then you just shut it down.